Yeah.
Oh, that music was so good.
I see you jamming on it. Yeah, we're not kidding around anymore, man.
That's real.
I just want you to know, I decided we've been doing this long enough that sort of
we should suck less at it.
Yeah, suck less. Less bad is the new good.
Should be less bad,
as I like to say. So
a
little bit of production values,
I like it. It was enjoyable. I'm sorry I missed it last week.
Oh, just wait. There's all sorts of more to come with little bits and pieces here and there. But hey, how you doing? We were going to stream last week. We had our whole topic ready, and you were going to join from a tropical location. You appear to be in your normal location. You don't appear to be.
That's true. I'm not in a tropical location anymore. But for a white guy, I'm slightly more tan than I was before. less pale, not more tan. Yeah. Just less translucent.
Right.
Yeah, but I had a jaw infection last week, and
no.
It's unusual for me to not be able to talk.
Yeah. Must have been painful in all sorts of ways for you anyhow.
You'd be surprised to find out that on my report card, the only thing they ever put on there was disrupts others in class.
I can't even picture that.
I know, right?
Well, okay. Hey, we're today we've had this series. It's I skip a week. I can barely remember, but this is step 2. We started the year with resolutions. We talked about basics. We had an episode where we talked about hardware inventory as one of the basics and talked through that. And we're going to continue that discussion today, talking about software inventory as the next basic we're going to wrap our brains around. So that's on track for today, but more high-end, overproduced graphics.
Let's do it. Make it fast.
Oh, yeah, so that is fast. Here we go. Man, look at that.
Somebody was bored over Christmas break. Good, I like it. Yeah. That's good. That's probably good.
All right. So software inventory.
Can I make some editorial comments
Please.
Before you get into your Uncle Brian's speech about software inventory?
Yeah. My Uncle Brian speech for software inventory is the same as if you want my Uncle Brian speech about software inventory, go back to the last episode and listen.
Yeah, we don't. Nobody wants it. No, let's be honest.
That's never the right answer. So please go ahead.
So I feel like I'm becoming reformed on this topic. And so I'm just going to put a disclaimer that I feel like I have one foot in the world of this is, so I'm going to describe this as a super good impossible thing. In thought exercise in academia, you're absolutely right. In practice, I call bullshit.
Tell me more. I'm listening.
Well, you're reforming me from,
bringing you down from the ivory tower.
Yeah, well, don't say that. That makes me sound bad. You did that earlier today. Well, so I like writing software,
Right.
and I like doing it a particular way because I get software inventory out of it. So I can tell you all my third-party dependencies and where I've imported them from, and I can vuln scan all the way down
Right.
into third-party dependencies, several layers in, and I think it's super awesome. And I think what I'm learning is like that kind of isn't a practical thing in most organizations.
Yeah.
And so if you would have asked me, 2 years ago, or maybe even a year ago, or maybe even 6 months ago, I would have been like, of course you need to do that. Because I can tell you where, every Log4j dependency is in my code pipeline. And when I do vuln scanning, I'm not going out and probing the network, right? I'm literally taking my software inventory, which is a table in a database.
You're not running a Nessus scanner to tell you
No.
what components you put into your own software.
I'll be honest, I was a little ignorant when I found out that's the way people did vulnerability management. I was taken aback.
You were taken aback. I like that. Yeah.
Yep. Because thinking of it from software terms, and I don't consider myself I'm not a software developer by trade, right? I'm a network infrastructure guy that's kind of grown into that world. But when I think of vuln management, a software inventory is super important, because when I was looking for Log4j in my code, it's the amount of time it takes BigQuery to process through my database of software dependencies to find Log4j. And so I'm like, that
which is like nanoseconds, milliseconds.
Yeah. Maybe 30 milliseconds, maybe 50 milliseconds, depending on how many joins I'm doing or whatever, And then we think of the other end of the spectrum that's let's do vuln management without a software inventory, where we basically this is what we kind of blindly feel things and touch them, and they're I don't know, that weighs about the same amount.
You remember that children's book, Are You My Mother? It's
yes, it's like that.
Are you a Log4j?
Are you my mom?
Are you a
Log4j? Is this a personality? We need that meme that's is this a Log4j? But yeah, it's so I was just shocked that but there's got to be some practical thing in the middle, because I reflected on it, and there's an unfair advantage that we collectively, not just you and I, but that we have when we develop new apps, cloud native, with all the things we know about security now. There's this this is what we would do differently now, and one of them is maintain a good software bill of materials. Okay, that's cool. That represents an increasingly large slice of the overall digital estate, but it's still relatively small.
Yeah.
It's
meaning the amount of software that I produce. Yeah, I think about my existing, I've got all this software I use to run my business in most businesses. And we were talking about most traditional companies. And then I've got some development going on of new cloudy, agile, cool stuff.
So we'll call it a microservices architecture.
Right.
Okay. A cloud native architecture. Even a lot of the folks that have cloudified, and I know because I helped move many of them to the cloud. It's we kind of took a lot of the old stuff that we had and just moved it to the cloud. We're not necessarily getting the benefit of all this refactoring,
lift and shift, if you will.
And I'm not making fun of anybody. That's the reality we have.
Yeah.
And then even where we have developed new apps, a lot of times they're new UIs that go around stuff we've had for a long time.
Still ending into my monolithic Oracle or Microsoft SQL database, for example.
Well, that would be very modern. Maybe it's a Z series with,
It's scraping mainframe green screens still.
It could be.
Yeah,
Could,
right.
Yeah, not calling anybody out. Just that's real. Um, so I love the idea of a software inventory because I live in that world. I live and die by it of being able to, when we have, there was just some plugins that came. I won't even mention the name. Some plugins that had some very severe vulnerabilities for remote code execution. Like we were able to get to those in minutes. I don't think that's the reality, and so that's where I have a. Sorry, now it's like Uncle Aaron's speech time. This is where I have a challenge with software inventory of like, cool story, bro, but how does anybody get to that
Right.
in some reasonable fashion? So that's my question to you.
Yeah. And how does anybody get to it? I think this is one probably even more so than the hardware inventory that I think software inventory. And we talked to the first one. We also talked about, and then there's like data inventory. You remember you kind of mocked me. It's like, no, you've never done hardware inventory, and you certainly haven't done software inventory.
No,
and you didn't even come close on data, and you didn't even scratch data inventory. And so how do we do it of hardware inventory? I'm going to go back and say that one as a basic, I think is somewhat achievable, and like start, build the processes, build as much automation as you can. Software inventory, because it's so opaque and it is so, that because there is almost no software bill of materials out there, and the state of the industry, the state of most businesses is that like, I don't know, I acquired this thing, somebody somewhere, like that's like 4 or 5 regimes ago. That was like 4 or 5 CIOs ago and staffs. And that was before the insourcing, outsourcing, merger, acquisition, divestiture, like all this weird stuff happened in our business. And we just ended up with this software. How could I even know, about software composition analysis or bill of materials?
Right.
And now what? Now here I am. How do I go back and make this thing basic, which is not basic? And I think I think how I do it is 2 answers of how I make this basic is 1, don't make the issue worse tomorrow than it is today. Which is to say, and this you've alluded to this a little bit, but I got a comment on our last one, or a question maybe, of like, is hardware inventory still kind of relevant? Because if we're moving to cloud and we're doing agile development, I don't need to inventory stuff. That's just a query that I can run.
That's still an inventory though.
No, I know, but
just the cloud kind of does it for you.
My point of where I would call bullshit, having been the infrastructure guy at a agile cloud-based, company, that is like, great, then show me the query.
Yeah, good one. You get them.
Because too many people, it's like in theory, I'm coding my stuff this way, and what libraries I'm using, that just as a query that I could run. Oh, okay. Name that tune, show me if you can prove to me that that's actually a query that we can run against this infrastructure, and you've actually coded it that way, not in theory, but in reality, you've actually coded it that way. Then I'm confident that our approach to cloud is not making this stuff worse. And then, my other piece is of where I think we make this basic is that there's instrumentation that we're missing even on our legacy traditional infrastructures. Of it may not be a millisecond, nanosecond query that you can go run a database, but too many organizations even lack the interest, much less capability of, well, what would the query be that I run? And I don't mean by query, I don't mean a Nessus scan that I'm going to run against my network, but do I have agents, and do I have capabilities, and do I have the knowledge and people capability to say, like when Log4j came out, of there's an approach where I scan the network, with Nessus, but there's another approach where I say, this is these are the names and files of that library, and I can, scan file systems of infrastructure, and I know how to recognize, what software is running in the organization, and turning that into, I'm building that inventory over time of what's budgeting something to make it better tomorrow than it is today, essentially.
Yeah. So let me build on that just a little bit. So there's this one end of the spectrum that, like, all the instrumentation and the processes are kind of built into cloud, whether it's private cloud or public. That's an essential component of, a cloud approach to microservices, is a software bill of materials, and it's we'll call it native, right? And then the other end of the spectrum is this, like, are you my mother approach, which I love, because that's totally what it is. And it's like, we have 1 million devices. Please go ask every one of them if they're the problem.
Hello, how are you? I am good today. How are you?
But also, when they tell you they're not the problem, you can't believe them at all because they're wrong. But anyways, so there's the are you my mother approach on this end.
Just, by the way, I have to say, I remember as we've been going through Log4j, I put this in the same category where we would do some scans and tell people, hey, your vendor has a piece of software running the Log4j component, and the human process equivalent of this "Are you my mother" exercise is Log4j happened. Send a survey to all your vendors. Are you using Log4j? Are you using Log4j?
And then there were a bunch that were like, no, of course we're not.
No,
like,
not bro. We're not.
That's very interesting because your device is responding to me on that phone. Okay.
Oh, wait. No, we are using Log4j. Thanks for telling us. Yeah.
So there's got to be a middle ground, and I'm a fan of hitting the middle ground. And this is just Aaron's personal perspective.
Where's the value? Like, where's the good that's may not be perfect, but it's better than what we're doing today?
I think that means we have to start identifying data sources that we have at our disposal.
Yeah.
That we can start planning around to do more of the programmatic, let's go look for matches, versus just brute forcing our network to do vulnerability scanning.
Right.
And there's, I'll share some of the ones I like. It's not necessarily right or wrong. And the thing I think people have to accept about this middle approach is that it's imperfect. It's more perfecter than the "are you my mother" approach, and less perfect than building a software bill of materials up front. But we do have some good sources of information and tools that we can use. A lot of the more modern EDRs create some basic software package inventory that we're able to pull, export via a database or through an API. And I feel like to hit this middle ground where, a new vulnerability comes out and I can do some reasonable programmatic evaluation of my inventory to see if that hits, means that I'm going to have to piece together several different data sources. And I think your EDR is one of them, but we know the EDR is incomplete. It's going to be relatively accurate for the devices on which it's deployed. But if I look at your estate, as much as you might say, hey, I have a EDR 100% in my environment. Well, what about that Alan Bradley device? You're saying you have it on? Well, no, of course you don't, right?
What about that little embedded Windows device that's in front of the conference room that you click to schedule the conference room or to see the calendar? It's all that crap.
So we need to get the EDR data, and we need to get it into a data warehouse.
Yeah.
To me, that's one. The second one is, there's good tooling, whether it's PowerShell scripts or shell scripts on Linux whether you're deploying those through some management platform or doing it automated, that we can go use those scripts and pull out a reasonable inventory of software via the registry and the memory from our critical assets. So that's another data source I think we need to be able to use. And then I think the third one for me is an automated version of Are You My Mother? But kind of doing that ahead of time where, we mess with some machine learning pipelines that are kind of, I'll call it Mr. McGuessy, of based on the way you're interacting with me, I can
We're inventing all sorts of vocabulary
I know, right?
today, isn't it great? But it's almost like there isn't a good vocabulary to describe these things today.
Right. Well, it's like when I apply data science in a machine learning algorithm, it's basically guessing, right? Based on all the known assets we've interacted with, where we know they have this software installed, you have an 87% chance that you also have this software installed. It's not discrete in the way that like it's telling us yes or no. It's just based on the way you're acting, we believe you to have that. And so I think those kind of 3-ish approaches are a good start, and that helps us detect things across legacy environments and cloud environments. And when we start to fuse those 3 data sources together, we get a relatively complete view of the software that we have. And I know people say, well, we know what software we have because we have a policy that says our procurement department can only buy these things.
Right.
And I'm sorry to make fun, like that's impossible, right? Or like we know. I had this interaction with a company.
That's crime doesn't happen in my city because we passed a law.
Right. It's like, we do phishing through Slack and other things. And I remember talking to one organization that was like, we don't use Slack. I'm like, how do you know that? Because we don't allow it. I'm like, dear customer, you Slack with me to talk about. Like, of course you're using it.
Then why are we having this conversation over Slack right now?
Yeah. So this idea that we're gonna like use some kind of like human-driven process, I think it's noble. I think it probably adds some constraints and creates this coarse indexing, but we cannot rely on that. We have to be able to go find these data sources, piece them together into a data taxonomy, and then we can start to get really quick queries against reasonably accurate software databases.
Well, and again, I'm gonna piggyback on yours and take it at this meta level. We were talking a little bit this morning in another conversation about kind of the history of people that do Windows administration, and I'll put myself into this category of like we're very used to a career that came up doing manual processes of clicking through installs and interfaces, or I want that data, I'm going to go log into an interface, some UI tool and click and type and pull out the CSV file and go massage.
I like how you get all hunched over when you like pull your Windows levers.
Yeah.
Like the
and I think you kind of made us, that's the pretty common and I would say historically that's correct. Although, if we're starting to live in a world, you mentioned PowerShell of like, I am finding of people who really want to call themselves Windows administrators these days. It's getting more like Unix, Linux, like where it needs to be way more of a
it's the only way I'll use Windows because PowerShell supports Linux commands.
Right. But my point is this kind of gets back to it of like we could get into what kind of products or that sort of stuff, but it almost gets into, well, how do I do these things? Like like if your workforce if you've got Windows administrators in your environment that aren't PowerShell friendly, like do not pass go, do not collect $200. Like go solve that this year because that's going to help you with software and hardware inventory.
Yeah, for sure.
All of these things are queryable, and PowerShell itself in a Windows environment is, we've always been able to write shell scripts to go query a bunch of these things in Linux, Unix, and those administrators like, where do I have this library? Well, let me go write a bash shell, bash script, for that, or something along those lines. So here's a regex expression. Windows, it's more like, well, I don't have the tool from big software vendor to do that query. Well,
Yeah.
it's just a query, go.
Well, and when we look at that, like we test this, right? We track data on this. If you're going to sit there and apply the sys hardening guidelines to a database, it's going to take you tens, maybe dozens of hours per database to even evaluate the 800 and some criteria that they've set for it. That's 30 seconds of PowerShell time to do that.
Right.
And do it at scale without deploying any application or agents or anything.
Right.
So I believe.
And will you do it consistently across the platform?
Across DBAs or.
Yeah. No, you won't.
You won't. Yeah. And so if you take the hardware inventory we talked about before, and then start to add, I think, this middle ground approach where it's not all perfecty of software bill of materials. It's not this rogue kind of nasty, are you my mother approach. It's this middle ground of pick your 2, 3, 4 data sources, script it, pull those into a data warehouse, so that you can run analytics on it in the future to look for these indicators of vulnerability inside of it.
Yeah.
And otherwise, we're going to get to the point, I think we're already past it, where if you're relying on, and I'm going to call it this forever now, if you're relying on the "are you my mother," vulnerabilities come out faster than you can scan your network to enumerate them. And you're basically doing a denial of service attack on your own internal network trying to find vulnerabilities.
Well, and we're talking about this topic earlier today as well, of not only will the vulnerabilities come out faster, but even when they do come out, the amount of lag time between vulnerability exists, vulnerability reaches awareness of people, a CVE is published, and then take that all the way down to, going from 0 day to it's a published CVE to it's in the National Vulnerability Database, and or the scanning vendors have some sort of typically imperfect scan that can kind of sort of say, you might have it, kind of, sort of. That's like many, that's like weeks, if not, longer, if it hits that level at all.
I've actually measured that, and the longest I've measured is 72 days from the time the to get all the way through that pipeline that you're there. And those are for lower severity. For the higher severities, it's faster, but that it can be longer than you would hope.
Right. Well, especially in this world that we know dwell time. We might know that the amount of time it takes an adversary to get from vulnerability exists to I'm actively using the vulnerability and I'm taking out organizations with it is down, and it's not 72 days. It's not. And it used to be longer than the monthly patch cycle. This is probably a topic for another time. We've hopefully, if we're this good, we've gotten to like a 30-day patch cycle.
Yeah.
And and dwell times and we're longer than that. That
you sound super nerdy when you say.
I know that people weren't turning around and attacking us with a new vulnerability in fewer than 30 days, and that is not the case anymore. That in days, people are attacking us with vulnerabilities. So. Cool. Well, I had some CIS slides already, and I'm, going to kick those.
I think we've already disenfranchised all of our viewers.
Yeah. No, it's all good, but good topics. I don't remember for the life of me what the next basic is, but we'll have it in the preview for next week. But back next week, continue on our basics. We have two or three more basics to cover, so we'll go from there. Good to talk to you.
I'd say it was good to see you too, but it really wasn't. So I guess.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Later.
Cool. More
Bye.
overproduced, cool music. Here we go.